find our way out.
Shut up.
See what the prince has lined up for us
Shut
tonight.
up.
Remember who you're speaking to.
Shut up.
Would it help if we found the fingers?
Shut up. First of all, let's just make this clear. All the tourists saying they don't care if it's not like the first game, the quirky Let's Players who just want to farm the latest thing for content, the Twilight or Anne Rice fans who think this is for them, the quote-unquote journalists who have no idea what they're talking about, the amount of people who've heard of it but are pretending they've actually played VDMB, the culture war grifters who will run this into the ground for a bit of ad revenue, all of you need to shut the fuck up. Vampire the Masquerade is probably the closest thing I have to actually caring about an IP. Here's the core rulebook that I've had for years. I've tried many times to get a chronicle going with friends and the like. I wrote an entire audio series or radio drama, Night Asunder, that was later deleted, and I even created an entire expansion inside Skyrim for the Dawnguard DLC called Old Blood back in early 2023. One guy, for free, with zero resources, inspired by the rich factions and characters of Vampire the Masquerade, not just the paper-thin writing of Bethesda and Harkin's mustache-twirling evil. Despite Paradox's best efforts, despite the endless humiliation ritual it is in seeing this amazing role-playing setting and the rich potential of the world of darkness dragged through the mud and defiled over and over again, even with everything that's been happening, I still held out some kind of hope that Bloodlines 2 would have any kind of redeeming aspect to it. I, and clearly many other people, have been eagerly waiting for someone to finally realize Vampire the Masquerade's full potential and tell the rich stories it deserves, but this is not it. The simple fact is, the Chinese room has made the wrong game from the very start, and they have made it very, very badly. Buckle up, because this is going to be a big one. I've been sitting on this for a long time. I've been wanting to go to fucking town on this game since it was first re-revealed, but about 2 years ago now, I left this comment responding to one of the update videos on the World of Darkness channel after the extended gameplay reveal. This was so poorly received, it was deleted a short time later, and fandom influencers like Outstar, Strange Adventures, and all the other parasocial losers who sold their soul trying to flog this joke of a game stuck their fingers in their ears, ignored feedback, and went full steam ahead, deciding to pretend it didn't happen. Multiple delays, 2020 to 2021 to 2023 to 2024 to 2025, and here it finally is. Bloodlines 2 fails in just about every way possible. There are two ways you could approach this review, as a Bloodlines game and as its own thing. For those evaluating it as a sequel to the cult classic, let me just list off the amount of things missing compared to its predecessor. No character creation, no humanity system, no frenzy, no bestial failures, no skill checks, no emergent gameplay, no builds of any kind, no stats, no branching dialogue, no lethally draining while feeding, no inventory, no melee weapons, no usable guns, no Gangrel, Nosferatu or Malkavian, no divergent paths, no multiple hub areas, and worst of all, no dancing at clubs. I could keep going with more technical stuff, like no manual saves, no FOV slider, but you get the idea. This is a completely linear game. Take that for whatever it's worth. Whether or not it's even a fantastic Bloodlines sequel really wouldn't matter, because I'm still going to evaluate this game for what it is, a shit show that disappoints in every single way. I need you to understand just how spiteful it is that, firstly, this game ever thought itself as a Bloodlines sequel, but also how devastating it is that this will spell the end for any Vampire the Masquerade games. A few visual novels were some pocket change at most, whatever the hell happened with the jank of Swansong, and don't even get me started about Bloodhunt again. You'd be hard-pressed to think of an IP that has been more mismanaged than Vampire the Masquerade, and the uncaring corporate indifference of Paradox begs the question of why they even bought the rights in the first place. 10 years now, and if anything, they've made it worse. This is the death knell for the world of darkness, and it's not the resounding triumph people were hoping for, but a pathetic, creatively bankrupt whimper. I don't envy the Chinese Chinese room. The team was handed a poisoned chalice, and they've openly admitted that their pitch wasn't even meant to be Bloodlines 2 in the first place. It was a separate game that Paradox forced them to salvage after what happened with Hardsuit Labs. Nevertheless, this is still the game they made, and they're ultimately just as responsible for it. Before we go any further, I also want to make it clear that the glazing of Hardsuit Labs in the E3 demo is way out of control. Ignoring the fact that the demo wasn't even well received at the time, putting the original Bloodlines 2 up on a pedestal, yes, even with Brian Matsuda or Chris Avallone's involvement, is easy, because we can romanticize games that never saw the light of day. It's the same thing with Silent Hills, Star Wars 1313, Van Buren, hell, even Rockstar's Agent, for anyone who's old enough to remember that, because people are more attached to the idea of what they were, rather than what it had probably been like to actually play. Back to Bloodlines 2 though, my impression is that the story with Fabian is the game the Chinese room really wanted to make. It's why the game revolves around him so much, why he won't shut the fuck up like the majority of modern characters, but I guess Paradox needed them to shoehorn it into the modern setting and reuse the Seattle assets. Let's just leave the whole Phyre thing to the side, because everything has been well and truly said about that already. Just look at that YouTube comment I posted at the start, and the fact the writers already had a perfectly good epithet like the Nomad to use, because it gets so much worse the deeper you dig into this travesty of a game. This is the first of many, many times I'm going to be cracking open that good old rulebook that's literally the basis of Paradox's own game, but if you're wondering what the whole shtick of having the Johnny Silverhand knockoff in your head is about, Phyre, oh god, I'm gonna get so sick of saying that by the end, committed the cardinal sin among vampires, diablerie. This isn't just draining someone dry, and a vampire for that matter. Think of it as essentially eating their soul. The reason why this is frowned upon by the Camarilla especially is that 1. It's essentially the vampire equivalent of cannibalism, something the Sabbat like, and 2. It's essentially a cheat to gain the power of the person you consume. If you played the original Bloodlines, you'll remember LaCroix getting all giddy at the prospect of an antediluvian, the progenitors of the clans we know them as today, for this very reason. However, the basic premise of Bloodlines 2 is really just the tip of the iceberg, because it gets so much worse from here. First of all, other kindred, especially high generations and elders, like Lou, for example, can sense diablerie by the aura. What about the tattoos? Yes, I'm sure the Chinese room was expecting that to be their get out of jail free card, but Seattle is in the middle of a war the moment you awaken. A notable kindred, Fabian, has disappeared, and then a near mythic figure emerges, and yet no one can sense they've breached the golden rule of the Camarilla. Did everyone just forget about that flamboyant, oh so talkative Malkavian all of a sudden? Dramatic license and the suspension of disbelief is one thing, but even if you want to argue that they're too scared of Phyre, for example, why doesn't anyone ever fucking say that then? I could have excused all that though if it wasn't for the fact that Phyre is positioned as an elder. For the record, I wasn't a fan of the original pitch of playing as a thin blood either, but whether it was the Chinese room's decision or Paradox to go the complete opposite direction, the whole game falls apart. I don't want to get too off track about lore and mechanical stuff in the tabletop, at least not yet, otherwise this video really is going to go on forever, but Phyre, the Nomad, whatever you want to call them, is over 400 years old. Like Bethesda not understanding just how much time has passed since the bombs fell, the Chinese room based their entire game around one of the most powerful vampires imaginable, a kindred who could walk into any room in the city and rip everyone apart, and thought that adding some mysterious tattoos would be enough to explain it all away. If you're not aware, think of vampires in the world of darkness as like a fine wine or whiskey. They get exponentially stronger with age. This is typically denominated by rank: fledgling for someone who recently turned, neonate within a few years of decades, all the way up to elders over a century, and the primordial antediluvians, whose awakening is thought to bring on Gehenna, the end of the world. Phyre, or the Nomads, or whatever you want to fucking call them, fails as a character in two major ways. To put this into perspective, Phyre has been in torpor for 100 years, is. That's the 1920s. They have no idea what a mobile phone is, CCTV cameras. They never saw World War II, the Vietnam War, the War on Terror, 9/11, the internet, the Civil Rights Movement. They should be amazed at even seeing a color television. Fabian may have lived through all that, but Phyre hasn't. The diablerie thing is there to explain it away, pairing us with a quippy companion that naturally won't shut up for 2 seconds, but this is simply not good enough. If you thought the lore rationale was bad enough, don't worry, because it's even worse from a strength or power scaling point of view. As I mentioned before, vampires get stronger the longer they live. There is some variation to this, such as blood potency and what particular generation you descend from. A 50-year-old 5th generation kindred could theoretically go toe-to-toe with a 200-year-old 9th generation, but Phyre is 400 years old. 400. The game repeatedly states this over and over again. Phyre is older than the United States. They predate the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, hell, the modern printing press. And yet, someone's stylus must have been on hand during those 100 years, because not only does Phyre look like they've strolled out of a modern university campus, they think and talk the exact same way too. Elders in Vampire the Masquerade are explicitly written as stuck in their ways, products of their time. The Chinese room understood this enough with Lou Graham, but why the hell would Phyre know what a fucking hashtag is? As far as they're concerned, the Anarch Uprising would amount to little more than a bunch of squabbling children. They probably still hate the Tremere as heretical warlocks that cheated their way into unlife, and they would dress like someone out of a BBC period romance at the very least. But no, they're modern. Someone got the Yas Queen girl boss treatment, and the combat feels the same. We'll get to the gameplay more in a little bit, but despite how obnoxious the conceit of Johnny Tattoo Hand in your head is, the lore and writing implications around Phyre as a character is just... God, I'm gonna frenzy in a minute. Coming back to Fabian again, the way this game handles exposition is also among the worst I've ever seen. Let me explain. Back in Dragon Age Inquisition, when you're at the Temple of Mythal, if you play as a Dalish, you have to listen to Morrigan explain who your own gods are to you. It's a similar thing with the first hour or two here. This is not characters believably interacting in universe. It's not some back and forth banter. This is just about as on the nose as it could possibly get for expositing to the player, not the character.
It's a ghoul, in case you didn't notice. You know my blood is Malkavian. You know they call us lunatics, madmen, or prophets. Keep it on the down low. We have a masquerade to protect.
Thin blood. Of weak heritage. A latter generation. The complete draining of one kindred by another so that the Vitae's power is consumed. Yes.
What you need from the prince is permission. And what we need is answers.
Worst of all, take this scene just after the game begins. The static camera is lazy as it is, it barely ever moves over the whole game, but think about what Phyre is doing here. He raises his hand and talks out loud to the person in his head rather than thinking it. He's not even raising his hand to look at it himself. It's raised facing away from him, at the player. This is how much of a brain-dead baby game developers think you are. We literally got a close-up look at it only a few seconds before. It's what prompted this conversation in the first place. These little vignettes inside your head with Fabian already existed in the game. Why on earth would a character, any character, let alone a near-mythical elder vampire, talk out loud when the same dialogue could happen as voiceover instead? My god, man. There is so goddamn much I have to cover when it comes to stuff like this. This continues throughout the game most nights, where Fabian wants to run through the things you've just done and explain it to you again, just in case the writers think you were busy picking your nose or drooling on yourself and somehow failed to miss the obvious. The writing, as with many developers and stories being written nowadays, treats you like a fucking idiot that needs to be repeatedly told where to go and what to think and what's happening every damn second. The Chinese room even added that stupid Telltale-style notification system of X will remember that, or Y isn't happy with you. Who gives a shit what they think? I'm a goddamn elder, a Lasombra, and later the sheriff of the entire city. Better yet, as a player, I am, in fact, capable of inferring how a character feels based on their reaction without needing to be explicitly told it. Thank you very much. Let's step away from Fabian and Phyre for a bit, since we'll get more into that in the story section later, and talk about the character customization, or should I say, the lack thereof. Since the Nomad is written to be from the Middle East, I was tossing up playing a Banu Hakim, but ultimately went with Lasombra. Lasombra are ruthless, powerful, and they don't play by the Camarilla's rules. In fact, until very, very recently in 5th edition, they were also part of the Sabbat, but have since joined the Camarilla. The various promotional material for Bloodlines 2 kept making a big deal about making Phyre your own, showing off all the outfits and whatever, but let me show you just how bad it really is. There are 4 hairs. 4! And the only difference is the colour, to pad it out and make it look like more than it actually is. It's a similar story with the outfits, since what people obviously wanted from a cult classic RPG is to play dress up, like this is The Sims. What the hell are these designs? I just settled with the trench coat for my Lasombra to keep it simple and elegant. The rest of the customization options, again, like to pretend there's more than there actually is. There's even a scroll bar, except it doesn't go anywhere. To round out this section, let's talk about what a nothing burger Phyre really is as a character. The clan-specific dialogue that the trailers were trying to make a big deal out of were exactly what I was expecting them to be. Little more than flavor, and very, very rarely appear. For some reason, the Chinese room want to have a pre-established character, except we know next to nothing about them for most of the game. It's the worst of both worlds. Phyre isn't like Commander Shepard, nor do they have the prior canon of Geralt from the books. They're an avatar that's treated as if they mean something, but the player isn't in on the joke. The one conversation with Sophia in the cafe is basically all you'll get in terms of character development, and again, that's where the clan-specific dialogue appears. Everyone talks about the Nomad, what a big deal it is to have them here in Seattle, and how you're some big legend, but these characters know more than the player does. Why should I care about any of this? When we pair this with the fact you're treated as a fledgling lackey anyway, despite being a 400-year-old elder vampire that should be turning everyone inside out without a second thought, and scare the shit out of even the oldest Camarilla licks in the city, Phyre has neither the development nor the presence that the so-called Nomad implies. Ultimately, we know as much about him by the end of the game as we did at the start. They're not actively part of the world like Commander Shepard, and they're not a blank slate avatar for the player to fill. They're just there, and there really isn't much role-playing to be had in this RPG.
The game is done. We are currently focusing on bug fixing, stability, and performance.
So we can deliver the best experience to you guys once it releases.
You'll have to forgive me for not having some grand intellectual segue between sections, but before we get into gameplay proper, I'll touch on performance, visuals, bugs, that kind of thing. If you've heard anything about this game, it's that the performance is terrible, and I'm oh so happy to tell you that was absolutely the case on my end too. I don't know Unreal Engine 5 that well, but it's earned a bit of a reputation by this point, one bad release after another. The over-reliance on frame generation and DLSS is well-worn territory already. It's become a lazy fix for developers who couldn't be bothered doing it properly in the first place, but Bloodlines 2 is among the shoddiest games I've played in a long time. That includes Cyberpunk 2077 at release. I'm not a graphics whore or anything like that. I grew up playing games with an unstable frame rate and lower settings on a crappy PC, so I'm really really not a stickler for 100 frames compared to 60. I've said before that RPGs are rough due to their ambition as much as their scale, and VTMV was obviously no exception either. I'm willing to look past a rough launch and bugs if there's something good beneath it all, but this game is a mess. For starters, anytime you load in or out of a major area, the game will completely lock up for a few seconds while it loads everything behind it. The frame rate is all over the place. Most of the game is within one relatively small area, but even then it frequently chugs and brings down the whole open world traversal. Don't move your camera around too quickly because the frame rate will struggle to keep up. It got so bad at one point, the audio itself was being shredded. Abysmal performance is one thing, but the game isn't very stable or polished either, despite how Paradox tried to con everyone into believing otherwise. Any developer saying that a release is delayed for polish is kidding themselves. Just as with most games being released now, Bloodlines was very obviously a struggle to get the bare minimum out the door after multiple delays stretching across years. Here's footage of only a few minutes into the tutorial at the very start of the game, where the door wouldn't open, the animation bugged out, and I was stuck in place. Reloading the previous save only a short time before did fix it, but talk about first impressions. Another instance was getting stuck inside a collision after gliding into the fire escape staircase on the outside of a building. I couldn't do anything to get out, so I had to reload a save once more. I'll give the game some credit, the lighting looks nice, and Seattle being all snowed in gives the streets a kind of cozy feeling. Chinatown and really any area with neon lighting means things look genuinely pretty at times, but it's hard to take in the sights when the world itself feels so artificial. A big part of this is the NPCs. The faces alone give that Starfield Uncanny Valley proc-gen feeling. They're quite frankly hideous. Apparently the Chinese room thought grabbing some cheap assets off the Unreal store and calling it a day meant that no one would really pay attention, but I'm sorry to remind you, this is indeed at least trying to be a Bloodlines sequel. For the most part, NPCs barely ever move. Aside from the few that will wander the footpath for the sole purpose of one or two lines to feed on or flee, it gives off that soundstage feeling that Avowed and the Outer Worlds had, not a real living world. Here's the same gaggle of people at the beginning of the game inside the Glacier Hotel, and here they still are in the exact same place, nights later. Nothing changes in this world. Here's another example, the same turned over truck is still there nights later, and the cops aren't even around. It's barren, empty, lifeless. The Chinese room had a at least partially finished game handed to them on a silver platter, and this is all they've come up with 4 years later. I repeatedly walked up to NPCs and they'll just blankly stare at you and say nothing. VTMV was no paragon of open world design either. There were tons of throwaway NPCs that were there mostly just to feed on and fill up empty space, but I remember the preacher near the diner, the hookers who say they'll scream, the dancers in the asylum or confessions. Name one NPC you meet in Bloodlines 2 that doesn't just come with a generic name like street worker or businessman. It's pathetic. The lifeless feel carries over into dialogue with the facial animations of a nutcracker, and that's if a character's lip syncing even works at all. To show you what I mean, here's a clip from a game released over 20 years ago on a buggy, unfinished branch of the as yet unreleased Source engine by a studio that was closing down before it was even released. Now, let's contrast this with Bloodlines 2, where the character's eyes even flick up randomly as some kind of tribute, I guess. What is she even looking at? Lou uses that same pre-canned animation of adjusting her hair about half a dozen times in just this conversation, and it's a similar story across the entire game. Pre-canned animations loop over and over and over again. NPCs rarely move, let alone emote with any personality or charm. Since we're here, let's finally talk about the voice acting too. The quality ranges from good, even great at times, with characters like Gideon, Sophia, or Lou Graham, who, if you're a fan of the Hitman series, you'll recognize as 47's handler Diana, to very, very bad, like Nyx the Gangrel, and the most effeminate gay trope trope imaginable in the Nosferatu Tolly.
You know what's really serious?
Educate me.
Those fucking pants. You look like an accident in a costume store and it's making a bad night worse.
The cast itself is clearly talented. I thought the male Phyre did a good job with the material, but the writing and direction behind it just isn't there. Even when it is, major dramatic moments or the voice acting is trying to convey someone being upset or whatnot, the facial animation is jarring. It's the same cheap handful of pre-canned animation that makes almost all characters look like they have Botox, with how little their face moves or emotes. At least you get the chance to finally shut that insufferable toreador up soon enough. The Chinese room has reportedly been working on this since 2021, and they also inherited a great deal of assets from Hardsuit Labs' version. The Nosferatu Samuel, now Tolly, the little cubicle things at the top of Atrium are one-to-one of the nightclub where you meet Elif in the E3 demo, Lou, your apartment with the Thin Blood Alchemist, and various landmarks are all major examples. With all that being said, why is there so little variety? What were their artists doing for the past 4 years? This one lady with the yellow mullet I must have killed about 100 times. Paradox has clearly written this game off. Did the Chinese room figure they'd do the same and instead focus on Still Wakes the Deep? Even the voice acting repeats ad nauseum. The team seriously couldn't be bothered writing a few more lines. Are you for real?
Nomad. What a fucking stupid name. Nomad. What a fucking stupid name.
I don't want to spend any longer on this section because this game has far more and worse problems to worry about, but the last thing I'll mention is the UI. The lack of FOV slider is somewhat understandable. I'm guessing it was for performance while traversing the map, since sprinting expands the FOV with a kind of fisheye or dolly zoom effect. But why is the UI on screen all the bloody time? Why do I need to have my powers always there when they should, like every other game in existence, understand it's contextual? Why can't various elements fade in or out as needed? Stop putting so much shit on screen. The UI itself is so bland anyway. The little blips that were probably meant to be analogous to hunger cost to use each of your skills is something we'll get to in a sec, but just like so many of the other assets in this accursed game, it feels so lazy. I rebound some of the keys just before starting the game, and not a single person took 5 minutes to make sure that the tutorial messages matched. That's how bad something as insignificant as the UI can be. The Chinese room couldn't even be bothered making paper notes or other similar in-world models for various items you interact with. It just takes you to a grey, boring codec screen. What a perfect little microcosm of how uninspired this game really is. Paradox and the Chinese room apparently thought they could win over the cinematic action crowd, since the RPG audience was certainly not happy to say the least. So it's funny then that for all the work that they put into stylish combat, it really doesn't feel as good as it looks to play. Enemy variety is again a huge problem. Get ready to fight the same handful of Anarch Ghoul models over and over again, but the limitations on powers is another huge issue. You're a goddamn 400-year-old elder vampire. Short of a stake through the heart, Phyre should walk into every room and make the ghouls explode just looking at them. I don't give a rat's ass about the tattoos. An elder vampire would be moving at the blink of an eye, disemboweling the same repeated ghoul models before they even knew what hit them, and making the entire city his playground. I've ranted enough about the blood strength and elder thing already, and no doubt I'll continue to later on, but let's talk about one of the biggest issues, one I probably find the most offensive in the game: how the Masquerade is handled, or more to the point, not at all. One of the very first things I did was walk right outside Phyre's haven and feed on someone directly in the view of everyone. Instead of the 5 strikes and VTMB, which included story-specific ways to redeem yourself and earn it back, Bloodlines 2 has an aggression meter. The first, safe or undetected, then warning, then red. Feeding on anyone will cause a Masquerade breach. The game will play the sound of sirens and helicopter passing overhead, but don't kid yourself into thinking they'd actually put that much effort in. If the bar fills all the way up on the alert status, let me show you what happens. This is a joke. Surely this must be a joke, right? Maybe my game just doesn't work the same way as anyone else. Or, maybe it's special to La Sombra, since the court wouldn't trust the Nomad, right? Right? No. Who is staking you? Who the fuck will get the jump on a 400-year-old elder vampire that can sense a pin dropping on the other side of a city block? Does the Chinese room not understand that final death isn't just sanctioned on a whim? Did someone seriously call Katsumi or Lou or whoever in the space of like 20 seconds to get this all signed off? Where did this person even come from? The answer, my dear viewer, doesn't matter, because Paradox and the Chinese room don't think the suspension of disbelief, nor clearly the law, matters either. But don't worry, because it gets so much worse. This is Phyre getting staked right after I left the building where I'd been appointed the sheriff. The sheriff. You know, the highest point of law in Kindred society. I got fucking staked by a complete nobody who spawns in out of the blue before the laziest game over screen imaginable, when I should be the goddamn person sending the Kindred in this city to their final death. Not only am I one of the La Sombra, not only am I actively recognized as a mythical elder vampire that should be making everyone in Seattle shit their pants, I was appointed only moments ago by the very people who just fucking staked me. They don't even have the decency to show your actual death, because getting a stake through the heart just paralyzes vampires. But wait, that's not all, because this will happen right out in the open. So, for breaking the Masquerade, the Camarilla gets someone to break the Masquerade to punish you for breaking the Masquerade. God damn. If that doesn't speak volumes about how much care was put into this game, let alone what little effort to adhere to the law and mechanics of VTM's own setting, I don't know what will. Fuck you. There's another element to what little passes as crime in this godforsaken joke of a game, and that's the cops. If you thought the police were bad in Cyberpunk 2077 at release, Bloodlines 2 once again manages to win the race to the bottom. Let me show you the same amount of effort that the Chinese room put into their AI. And hey, maybe they think this is some radical social commentary that cops would shoot first and ask questions later, but this is so pathetic. Even VTMB, you know, a game from 20 years ago, has better police behavior than this endlessly disappointing farce of an RPG. I bitched about enough of this stuff though, so let's get into combat itself. As mentioned earlier, the slick cinematic gameplay that you've seen in trailers is not the reality of what it feels like to play. First of all, there's no block at all in an almost entirely melee-based game. Only a dash. All that talk comparing Bloodlines 2 to Dishonored before release is a huge insult to Dishonored, an actual immersive sim that is light years ahead of this stupid thing. Dishonored 2 has the best level design in any game ever, and I mean that without hyperbole, whereas this game is a one-way, entirely linear and on-rails ticket from one uninspired, empty box to the next. Don't get fooled by the Doom-style executions either. I hope you like seeing the exact same finisher animation over and over and over again, because just like the NPCs and asset variety, there is zero variety in the combat animations too. This is literally it. That's all there is. Most encounters, you'll be flailing, then dashing, and slapping some ghouls around for good measure, and again, this is about as far as it could get from an elder that should be able to vaporize everyone in their way. These big brute enemies are a joke, because this isn't some bottom of the barrel level scaled shooter. Physical strength, even for ghouls buffed by vampire blood, doesn't mean shit in VTM, because even the most frail looking elder should be able to rip their limbs off through the strength of their blood. Yet another in the long list at this point of how little thought was put into this game is the fact that stealth attacking the big guys isn't an insta-kill, and even when you do it in the middle metal of combat, it doesn't even damage their health. Like, am I dreaming at this point? The developers at least went to the effort of animating it, but their stupid bloated health bar doesn't move after being fed on by kindred. Any kindred, let alone a centuries-old elder. Ironically, the only time you'll actually feel powerful is towards the end of the game with the Second Inquisition's forces. This is a complete inversion of what it should be, since the whole point is that they're armed with the best, most high-tech imaginable for the sole purpose of slaying vampires, yet it's some stupid ghouls and ripped genes, little more than kine, that are doing more damage to an elder early game. A baseball bat would only piss a kindred as old as Phyre off. Still, it was satisfying to show them what a real blank can do. As mentioned already, I went with all La Sombra this playthrough. I dabbled a bit with the others. I was tossing up whether Banu Hakim would fit better and tried a couple of their disciplines, but La Sombra not only looks the part, fits the kind of unstoppable, ruthless force I was trying to play Phyre as, but also scared the shit out of anyone in my way by using their own shadows against them. Unlike a lot of people who've criticized the game, I feel indifferent to the 4-power limitation. If you read the rulebook, it's not that dissimilar in the tabletop. More power typically comes from investing in disciplines from the other clans, which you can at least do here, and although it annoyed me at first that you have to drink from the quote-unquote trainers to learn any new abilities, at least it makes sense that Phyre of all kindred could do this without risking a blood bond. What I wasn't so happy about, however, was the fact that the La Sombra clan perk, being able to feed on mortals without being attacked, doesn't work half the time. You have a handful of abilities, including some pretty basic passives, but I guess it was too big an ass to make sure they function properly either. Finally, tying back into the Masquerade breaches from earlier, La Sombra are obscured by shadow every time they feed, which includes the middle of the street, right in front of others. You know, something the kind just might think is a bit out of place. Even in their own game, the devs can't be consistent. I raise the alert meter for jumping over a bike rack, yet I can have shadows seeping out of me and no one bats an eye? Good grief. This certainly doesn't qualify as story, so let's talk about the side content next. Apparently Rock Bottom wasn't already enough for the Chinese room, so they decided to try even one-upping Bethesda with the laziest padding crap imaginable. I only did the first 3 of these to see whether anything would change, but if you thought Bloodlines 2 wasn't finished disappointing everyone, the side quests are the same kind of radiant garbage that's been infecting game design for years. It's exactly what it sounds like. You get sent to a nondescript place, steal, kill, or deliver something to some no-name NPC, and that's it. They just end too. You rarely go back to the primogen or trainer who gave you this crappy excuse of filler in the first place. It's just slop for the content treadmill to earn some more XP. But since you've already unlocked all your core powers within the first couple of hours anyway, why bother? There is no progression, so it's even less worthy of your time than Bethesda's patented time-wasting crap. But that's okay, maybe it's just not for you, because there's completely pointless collectibles too. In the lead up to release, the World of Darkness tried to show off side content in an official stream and everything, yet we saw little more than running around the one map, absorbing some paintings from the walls and the resonance events. This is genuinely one of the more impressive instances of shooting yourself in the foot that I can remember, because the reality is, they spent an entire stream trying to pretend there is meaningful side content in a game that has none. Yes, Paradox, what people really wanted in their deep, rich, character-driven RPG is to glide around an empty box and click on random graffiti. Round of applause, everyone. Anyway, to round out the combat section, there is the rare glimpse where it does click and things flow together, but this seems more like dumb luck than any intentional flow state within the game. AI is wildly unpredictable. You already saw what happened with cops the moment they see someone acting up, but stealth, especially as a La Sombra, where that's kind of the whole point, is hit or miss. Sometimes enemies will see you through walls, while other times I can take out 2 or 3 people and an enemy standing only a few steps away doesn't notice a thing. The range of stepping into shadow was at least nice, being able to move around an area unseen, snapping necks, or feeding on the enemies without anyone noticing were among the rare moments where Bloodlines 2 actually felt good to play. Open combat, however, is not fun for anyone involved. There's the power issue again, but telekinesis doesn't add anything to the game because I guess the Chinese room thought Phyre was too stupid to figure out how a gun or baseball bat works, never mind the fact they've survived the past 400 years. Speaking of telekinesis though, let's talk about the open world traversal. First of all, let's just disregard the idea that this is open world in anything but name. Here's the map. This is not just a starting area like VCMB's districts, there are no other locations, and all of it is practically for show. I hope you like walking too, because you're going to be doing so much of it, especially as Fabian, since the developers won't even allow you to jump. A 10cm outcrop and you have to go round, I guess. Otherwise, some guy climbing over a fence would obviously mean a Masquerade breach. At least he gets a heightened run with a kind of time dilation effect thanks to celerity, but you'll be going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between the few locations on the map you can actually go inside, the ones marked in red. As for Phyre, well, it's fine. I already mentioned how awful the performance is, so good luck trying to hit that graceful glide the trailers make it out to be. The movement itself feels good enough, I suppose, but the problem is more the actual terrain. Pipes and staircases and flat walls that will sometimes let you climb up, sometimes not. It looks like fun, but it's not as unbroken moving across the rooftops as it should be. I was pretty pissed off the moment I saw health potions initially, but after playing the game, I'm not that fussed about them. The presence of thin bloods and Tremere like Sophia is enough to contextualize blood alchemy and elixirs used to create them, and they'll also come in handy with how often you'll be getting ganked by flailing enemies like the Unbirthed, so I'm indifferent to it. The potions are relatively rare, at least on normal difficulty, which is good, and feeding remains the main source of healing. It's stupid as hell for how terrible the Masquerade system is that no one notices the ghouls and later Sabat fighting on the rooftops, or the very loud sounds of gunfire, but that's beyond a dead horse at this point. Combat isn't fun or intuitive to use, so at least it's on brand, so to speak, that the Chinese room put little effort into making basic movement feel good either. With the amount of criticism I've leveled at the game so far, it's fitting that what little they did take from 5th edition is the part I care the least about: blood resonance. The whole sanguine, phlegmatic, etc. thing is something that I never really paid much attention to. Personally, I think it's stupid and don't really care about that kind of detail to buff based on what's essentially the equivalent of flavor for vampires, but clearly the Chinese room thought otherwise, since they tried, and failed, to build up this reactive system about feeding on particular NPCs. Again, why the hell would you be wasting your time unlocking other clan powers when you're already set anyway? But the Sim-style dress-up minigame rears its head once again. The idea is to draw in particularly potent kine and gain resonance that you can then use as a currency to unlock other clan powers with trainers. The AI is laughably bad, and these encounters are little more than 1 or 2 lines at most, but going back to what I said about the Masquerade system, you don't even need to bother with it anyway. All the more so if you have Obfuscate or another discipline that can help you move in and out unseen. You can walk straight up to angry or sad or horny NPCs in front of everyone, drain them, but not lethally because of how cowardly this game is, and then hide until the breach cools down. This poor excuse of a system that the Chinese room must have wasted a lot of resources on is really the perfect way to sum up gameplay in Bloodlines 2. Pointless fluff that means nothing, does nothing, and goes nowhere. What a joke of an RPG. The last section, before I finally get into taking the story apart, is the few pathetic attempts the game makes to try and harken back to the original. First of all, there's the nepotistic casting of another World of Darkness parasocial loser, just like Outstar and Strange Adventures, called Huddy as the radio host, the Bet of Night. It should be pretty obvious what they were trying to go for with that name, but let me give you a taste of how weak the voice acting is.
When you turn me on, Seattle, and you know just how to do it. so I won't keep you waiting any longer.
This is like listening to breathy ASMR on a $10 mic, and the quality doesn't hold a candle to Deb in the original game. The developers won't even let you turn the radio off. The seductress scene gives me second-hand embarrassment more than anything else. There is no personality, no banter, none of the funny ads or crazy callers, just bland, safe, corporate, sanitized slop. I have no idea who this Huddy person is. I've never watched any of her videos, but she's popped up from time to time, just like all the other orbiting shills, as a community ambassador, or whatever they're trying to sell them as nowadays, for the world of darkness. Just recently, I saw there was a video where she's interviewed before release. Like Outstar or Josh, the guy from Strange Adventures, who worked directly for the Chinese room as a community manager, I really don't care what they're like as people in real life. Maybe they spend their days rescuing cats from trees and feeding the homeless. I don't have anything personally against them, but these people have sold out for their 15 seconds of fame. More power to them, because it certainly wasn't worth it. Next thing, let's talk about how disgusting the whole DLC situation is. In an industry that seems to be in a constant race to the bottom, Paradox still somehow manages to be scummier than most. They don't make the kind of games I usually play, but it was at least nice to see everyone collectively lose their shit and push back against Toreador and La Sombra, two of the already pitiful 6 clans available, locked behind a paywall. At least Paradox had enough sense to not screw what little good faith they had left, and instead compensated with a vague promise of 2 story DLCs next year. But given the quality of the base game, more fool you if you buy it. Season passes are common practice, but that's not what I wanted to talk about. No, let's instead talk about the Santa Monica Memories Pack, because, haha, isn't it so quirky that we can have the stop sign instead of a dartboard in the apartment that serves no purpose other than a place to sleep? Sure, why not? It's not like it means anything more than playing dress up. What about the pacing of the Vorman sisters to remind you of a game that, as broken and buggy as it is, trounces Bloodlines 2 in every way? Even the base game, those little Easter eggs like estrogen pills on Dale's desk, that's 1, what is it even doing there in the first place beyond a reference? But 2, the game also takes the opportunity to lecture anyone making assumptions why this throwback to what was otherwise random junk to sell in the first game's there. This is peak nostalgia bait slop, something that remake culture has already made well and truly clear with how rife it's become within the industry, but Paradox can get fucked for thinking they could bump up the sales numbers with this low effort throwback to VDMB. And if you pre-ordered the game, then I hope you're happy, because you're getting exactly what you deserve. And don't worry, because the throwbacks don't end there, but we'll get to that very soon. At long last, we finally come to the story. Since the Chinese room makes walking simulators and little else, a game that's supposedly all about story and characters as much as Bloodlines 2 should mean that's the best part, right? Well, I'm sure this will come as a big shock, but no. A little conspiracy theory I have is that the Chinese room deliberately used the one autosave slot to pretend to have what little replay value there is. 1, to reduce the likelihood of the few people wanting to play this stupid game multiple times to see how little actually matters, but also to try and make out that each run is distinct beyond that first slot before you choose your clan after the tutorial. Anyway, the field of flowers and dramatic voiceover that was teased in the trailers had me thinking the big bad and the reason why Phyre was brought to Seattle in the first place was his sire. This turns out to not be the case, although it was pretty close. It ends up having to do more with Fabian, which lends more credence to that original game the developers wanted to make, because they called the gardener and they're behind a plot using the Sabbat. That's not too surprising. Most VCM chronicles, or campaigns as they're called in other games, tend to fall into one of the few broad categories: infighting in the Camarilla, a repeat, I guess, of VCMB with the Anarch-Camarilla Turf War, the Second Inquisition, or, for some reason, outsiders if you can justify them like the Sabbat. The reason why the Sabbat is a problem is that they've practically been wiped out by 5th edition. This is one of the big reasons why La Sombra fell in with their old enemies the Camarilla, essentially in an effort to survive. The Tremere are on a back foot after things hit the fan with Vienna and the Pyramid, and the Second Inquisition is positioned as the big new threat as of current day. Sabbat are not subtle. They have always always been fundamentally against the Masquerade, and they believe kindred should rule over mortal kind, but that's where we run into the first big problem of the story. How is this gardener guy able to sneak in an army of bloodthirsty Sabbat lunatics who are the polar opposite of the word stealthy? How does no one pick up on the fact there's a large group of Sabbat in the city until the story conveniently magics them into existence? Where did they even come from? How would a well-oiled machine like the Camarilla not pick up on a slew of Masquerade breaches outside the little spat with the Anarchs? This makes even less sense given who was behind it all and how they somehow managed to do this for decades without a single person from the highest prince to the sneakiest Nosferatu noticing, but again, we'll get to that very soon. Anyway, I could keep poking holes in this, but let's move on. Seattle is a well-established Camarilla city. This gardener guy has been playing the very, very long game with proxies, which is believable to a point. The Anarchs have splintered even further, and it's also caught the attention of the Second Inquisition by the latter half of the game. So where does Phyre fit in? That's an excellent question. I'll give the game some credit. The twist that Gideon, the Malkavian Primogen and Fabian's sire, being revealed as the gardener was well done. I could see the Sophia death coming from a mile off, so the reveal of her as the big bad Sabbat psycho was also a genuine surprise. Guess I'm a sucker for Tremere, but that's about it. I've already said how much this feels like Fabian's story and Phyre is more along for the ride. Part of that is because there is so much talking and so little of it means anything. To give you an idea of just how on rails the entire game is, let me show you what happens when Fabian is allowed to use his powers. The whole shtick of being a detective and piecing together the clues as part of a big investigation is really just for show, because there is no branching and quite literally no room for failure. Talking with an early NPC you'll encounter, Pandora, the writers oh so graciously allow you to use one of your powers at this point, specifically Mask of 1,000 Faces. To briefly explain what this does, it makes you appear to the affected person as someone they recognize. The catch being, you don't know exactly who they see you as, hence why you have to draw that information out of them. Except, there's no way to fail this conversation, or any of the other moments this happens in the game. If you pick the wrong options, you get booted out of the dialogue tree and have to use the discipline again, but it even restores the blood point. There's no trick, no puzzle, you can keep trying 100 times or 1,000,000. All that matters is that you eventually click the dialogue options the game wants you to. It's pathetic. I know why this is the case, for balancing reasons, to not softlock players as much as convenience, but this is playing as a detective in a game that claims to be an RPG, remember? There's even points in the game where you'll get slapped across the wrist by Fabian and the developers for daring to leave dialogue before you're supposed to, which begs the question, why even pretend to have dialogue options anyway? Developers need to get this through their head. Don't present an option if it doesn't mean anything. Just tell a linear story then. Don't pretend you're some in-depth RPG when you have about as much narrative agency as a Ubisoft game. Anyway, as with previous videos, I'm not going to summarize the game because I doubt you care any more than I do, and also that's a lazy way to pad runtime, so instead I'll address the major points. It turns out there was no Santiago or involvement from the Society of Leopold, the main hunter group before the modern Inquisition. The rebar killer was Lou Graham all along, with Campbell as the muscle. He's the first there during that initial string in the 1920s, like the cigarette girl as Fabian, and all of it was essentially misdirection, as Lou attempted to consolidate power and wipe out all her enemies. That's certainly very Ventrue, and Kindred Society is nothing but ruthless. The traditions often come as a secondary concern to the promise of power, but what really sets events in motion is the killing, or at least disabling, of the Malkavian Primogen Gideon, who, much like Grouse in VTMB, their insight risks exposing everything. Fabian also solves the case, multiple times for that matter, but the Ventrue are able to wipe his memory of it each time. It also turns out Sophia and Gideon were a thing, which is not impossible either. Quick aside, but Kindred do not have sex because feeding is better than anything they experienced in their mortal life, but it is theoretically possible with blush of life and a high enough humanity. There's a specific feeding type called the Siren, which uses sex as their particular ritual or target, but for most Kindred, they can't even fake enjoying it. Gideon's quote-unquote death is what sets Sophia off the deep end, and I guess it's implied that he reaches out to her in dreams, much like with Fabian, long before the events of the game. Whether this is happened already when she's saying goodbye in the 1920s time and going abroad for some years, that's not really clear, but at some point she makes contact with the Sabbat and loses her mind in pursuit of revenge against Lou and the Camarilla that damned Gideon. This all culminates in the biggest masquerade breach the world of darkness has ever seen, but first let's break this down. Gideon is apparently staked through the heart with rebar, which, as I mentioned ages ago at this point, doesn't kill vampires, it only paralyzes them. Now, it's a bit iffy in the details here about how he could use his powers while he's staked, but a bigger problem is why he isn't reduced to a gibbering, blood-starved mess after not feeding for presumably years, if not decades. He's held in place by the rebar, sure, but the beast would have taken hold within a few nights after last feeding, and Gideon must have spent ages like this before Sophia found him. That at least explains how insane he is, reduced to a gross, sickly mess, but I'll give the writers the benefit of the doubt and dramatic license that he was able to contact Sophia. The question is though, why is he still staked with rebar in the 2020s? I was relieved that the old Chinese ruins beneath the city didn't try and shoehorn a Kuei Jin cameo in there, but if Sophia knew everything to set this plan in motion, it begs the question, why haven't the Sabbat forces at least moved him and settled him into a more comfortable position? This is the guy growing the unbirthed husks after all, at least initially. Sophia knows where he is, she's doing this all for him, and the two of them are full-blown and raving Sabbat, but she leaves him there the whole time? So much for love, I guess. Before we go any further, let's circle back around to the relationship system in this game, and also the other major factions at play. As I said, I was playing Phyre as a ruthless Lasombra who just gets more and more sick of everyone's shit the more the game went on, and I was openly rude and dismissive to Lou as much as the de facto Anarch leader Katsumi. For all those little notifications may pretend otherwise, however, ultimately the reactions mean about as much as the extremely rare clan-specific dialogue. It's just flavor text, and the story will proceed regardless. Ignoring how awful Kasumi's character design is for a moment, who the hell thought this was a good idea? Near the end of the game, at least on my run as the sheriff, you're sent to kill her by Lou before a blood hunt is called on every Anarch in the city. The dialogue implies that you can kill her here, but I get the feeling it wouldn't have led to that anyway because you're interrupted by a laser scope, regardless of what dialogue options you pick. This leads to the reveal the people she's been meeting with are insurrectionist Anarchs and not the Sabbat, and because this is definitely a Bloodlines game, right guys? The person who almost shoots Phyre with phosphorus sniper rounds is revealed to be none other than Damsel. Why? Why her? Why of all people is Damsel here? I mean, it's a shame they couldn't get Courtney Taylor back, although given what happened with Hardsuit Labs, maybe she didn't want to. LA is on the other side of the country, and the Anarchs have bigger problems given the amount of ghouls that are just plants for the Sabbat. For the record, I don't care enough to replay this game, probably ever, to see whether siding with the Anarchs would have drastically changed things, given how on rails the entire story has been. Anyway, basically all the major factions are arseholes. That's not too surprising given the nature of VCM and kindred society. Lou was killing anyone and everyone in her way, including her own sister, Rosalind. Katsumi is messing around with blood sorcery and putting on a brave face, while the whole Anarch cause continues to be its own worst enemy, and they don't have anywhere near the amount of people they think they do. Benny is running around killing Thin Bloods, which should be the least of anyone's concerns right now. Max is cowering off on his own somewhere and can do little more than talk about the greater good, and the Sabbat have somehow moved all their forces to bring on the end times in Seattle. Thanks to everyone losing their collective minds, it's also drawn the attention of hunters and the Second Inquisition too. Talk about things hitting the fan, huh? I could nitpick about little things in the story, like how the hell Campbell's body was moved from the warehouse, and by who, after Phyre goes full frenzy, how everyone in the city, kind and kindred alike, wouldn't be gunning for Phyre when the beast takes over the moment they awaken from torpor, and how the hell the Camarilla managed to spin this one off, or how Lou is just standing around completely unprotected at the beginning of the game when she's the seat of power in Seattle and should have a small whole army protecting her at all times like LaCroix. How exactly the Sabbat was able to get the blood from Isabella at Atrium down to the Moonflowers, how implausible it is that Sophia or any of the Sabbat could kill Pandora at Fletcher's bar without any of the centuries-old kindred hearing them with their innate preternatural senses, why Sophia wants those banned books from Lou when she's already set her plans in motion and knows everything at this point, or how Nyx and Onda are just kinda there and don't really do anything for the story, but we'll be here all day. Just before we do get into the end stretch though, I have to talk about the insufferable padding in this game. I already pointed out how pathetic the side quests are, how lifeless the world is, and how little there actually is to do beyond these stupid, meaningless collectibles, but even the main story itself wasn't immune to this either. There are multiple points where you're sent on errands that aren't even worthy of a ghoul, let alone a sheriff or a powerful 400-year-old elder. The worst offender, by far, is the mission where you're sent by the god-awful voice acting of the gangrel Nyx to get 3 people for Lou to feed on, but a similar thing happens with Fabian near the end of the game. There's a point where you need to go down to the basement of the Glacier Hotel, but you're sent off to run errands for Tully, who's sitting nearby, because I guess the writers couldn't think of any other way to give these 3 characters some last-minute development. Why is he even sitting out in the open? Nosferatu's appearance is akin to a Masquerade breach, although it has been toned down a bit in 5th edition. It's not like he's standing right in front of the elevator either. Why doesn't Fabian just tell him to get stuffed and take the elevator anyway? Let me walk past him, goddammit. Not only is it lazy padding, it doesn't even make sense. You do what the Chinese room wants you to do, and when they say it. What a great RPG. I'll give the game some credit in that it ups the stakes dramatically, no pun intended, by the time Sophia is killed and the Sabbat are out in force. First of all, this should be getting the attention of every single mortal in the city, the internet, media across the world, but it's going to get so much worse, so I'll circle back to this point in a bit. The Hunters and the Second Inquisition, fittingly called the Information Awareness Office, or IAO, feel like they were little more than an afterthought, and show up to add what little enemy variety there is, and the fact they should probably be there since this is a VCM game or whatever. That Baker lady, Mother Hen, is another atrocious example of character design in this game. Again, who the hell thought this was intimidating? Her glasses make her look like that lady from The Incredibles. This is the kind of design by committee caricature that people have been making a joke about for years. Yet, within the space of like a 30-second conversation, she's begging you to turn her, and that it's just so sad. Naturally, Phyre was having none of that, and feels about as much empathy for Hunters as he does the Sabbat. Since we're talking about this, I guess it's finally time to address the elephant in the room.
I wouldn't know Sabbat if it drove a truck with "Make Gehenna Great Again" painted on the side.
Look, I don't like getting into this because I've said many times before that I care more about good writing, and thus will criticize any bad writing, whatever form it takes, than individual attributes of a particular character and potential narcissism of the people creating them. The term woke has been bandied around so much by this point that it's lost all meaning, the same way that incel has. This is not a drama channel. I've made my thoughts well and truly clear before, and I just want to have good storytelling and characters in all media, but there's simply no way around it. This game is one of the more egregious examples of cartoonish corporate diversity. Lou Graham is a character from the lore, I believe, which is perfectly fine. She's the real Prince of Seattle. Her child, Ryong, becomes the prince in her stead after Campbell, the dumb, purely muscle thug, gets his head ripped off by Phyre in a blood frenzy. The leader of the Hunters is an old black lady who's little more than empty, idle threats before she quickly folds due to dying of cancer or something. The Tremere Primogen is an old English woman. Sophia, the big bad and knowledgeable Tremere, is a Middle Eastern woman who somehow raises an army of Sabbat without anyone noticing. The La Sombra trainer Onda is a black woman. The Toreador trainer is a non-binary or whatever person called Patience. And the Primogen is a black woman who's obsessed with art and also seems to be a siren that exclusively feeds on women, so presumably a lesbian. Almost every single character who holds a modicum of power in Seattle is queer and or a woman. Of the few who are men, Fletcher is an effeminate dandy who seems to be gay, if that's not stated outright and I just can't remember. Benny is a bumbling idiot who gets written off pretty quickly in the game and more bark than bite. Max Weber might as well be a cardboard cutout for how little he matters to the story. Gideon doesn't get much screen time as it is and dies in a cutscene. And Silky, the one truly masculine, if you like, man, sits in his club all the time despite being the Brujah Primogen and does nothing for the whole game. Same goes for the Banu Hakim pawnbroker Nico. Make of that what you will. Again, I don't want to get into the whole culture war discussion or trying to qualify what is or isn't woke. I'm certain you can make up your own mind based on that information. Arguing on the internet never helps anybody. Quick aside, but good on Gideon for messing with Lou's head, by the way. Making her retreat in fear of the beckoning was a nice touch. That still comes with a catch though, because I remember someone mentioning she's been up there in the penthouse for around 30 years. So again, why has Gideon been down there staked by rebar all this time, and Sophia only started imitating the killings to get her attention just recently? But whatever. Anyway, back to the story again. Returning to Weaver Tower, I'll give the game the benefit of the doubt here that Sophia takes Phyre by surprise, given all the setup beforehand. Unfortunately, this is also where one of the big lore breaks begins, so bear with me while I explain this. Ryong ultimately being depicted as a pawn makes her sympathetic because her death is just about the worst way to go for any kindred. The reason why vampires need to sleep each night is not only because of the whole imagery of night crawlers and whatnot, but because their vitae, the blood, essentially recedes and they become lethargic. There are cases where a kindred can rise from slumber during the day, such as the beast taking over as a last resort, but to do so, it requires considerable willpower. For this scene to even occur, Sophia, Phyre, Ryong, and all the other Savat in the room would have had to somehow overcome their base instinctual desire to sleep before the sun even begins to edge over the horizon. Look outside, because the sky is gold at this point. Now, I could forgive that, dramatic license and all that, maybe it's daylight savings or something, I don't know. But what happens next is, while certainly dramatic flair, completely breaks the setting. This simply isn't possible. If anything, because Phyre is so old, they would burn and die faster than Ryong did. It's not impossible to survive sunlight, although it comes with huge amounts of aggravated damage, but even touching it is risking final death. I get what the Chinese room were trying to do here, but this doesn't make any sense. Let's just ignore the civilians watching a burning vampire crawl across the street right in front of them, since the masquerade is about to be in tatters anyway, but assuming that Phyre didn't burn up in that initial fall, the slow crawl over to the sewers still has them out in the sunlight, not even the shade for most of it. Even if you were to go with the moon logic, Phyre would survive the, fire. This would fill up their aggravated damage bar, to use the tabletop terminology, and put them in the kind of torpor that would last decades, if not centuries. Their body simply cannot heal that quickly, even with the strength of their vitae or Fabian or whatever. So Phyre would either be killed or wake up like 500 years later if they somehow managed to lie there all that time in the sewer without anyone noticing. And even if you accept that Phyre somehow survived all this, he also wouldn't be in control, with or without Fabian's help. The beast and kindred's equivalent of the fight or flight instinct would kick in the moment they come near sunlight, and this would make what happened when Phyre awoke from torpor look like a polite disagreement. The cinematic crawl is there for effect, sure, but it doesn't make sense. The issues don't stop there either, because Sophia is standing right in front of Phyre when they go careening out the window, so she would die instantly as well. Unfiltered sunlight is the deadliest possible thing to any kindred, however powerful, however old, because it destroys them at the slightest touch. Jumping forward a bit, we finally round things out with Fabian. I made it clear in that initial intro that I hated Fabian for most of the game. Again, to demonstrate how meaningless the relationship system is, I was rude to him multiple times, not interested in a diplomatic approach to the conflict, and played Phyre as pissed off at the idea of someone stuck in his head. But to give the game the little praise I can offer, I actually liked him by the end. I don't get why they rendered Phyre as the default model that you awoke as here, rather than what you've customized him to be, but the little send-off in the dream was a neat way to round out the character. Despite everything, the game succeeded. It actually endeared me to Fabian. Two things though. Firstly, I have a sneaking suspicion the reason they hide his face for the whole game comes back to asset reuse again. During Fabian's sections, the outfit tab isn't available and it fades to black during feeding, so I think what the Chinese room actually did here was reuse the male Phyre model, make him bald from what little I can make out at a distance during that final scene, and just change his outfit to a trench coat. That's not a big deal, because the second point involves the mark and why he's even going to his final death here anyway. To take it back a bit, the mark was done by Sevilla and the Sabbat after she returned from presumably the Middle East at some point, where the Nomad had been in torpor, also for some unknown reason, and then performed some kind of binding ritual on their body. This is what weakened Phyre prior to the game, essentially acting as a leash. Her reasoning for this was because he'd act as a vessel for Gideon to be reborn in as soon as the Nomad awoke from torpor. For how things work out with Fabian though, I'm sorry to say this doesn't make sense either. First of all, the whole premise is that Gideon would take over the Nomad's body, except Fabian doesn't do that once, isn't even capable of doing so. He's little more than a voice inside your head. This is still a step up from what usually happens with Diablerie. At most, it's the occasional echo or feeling, then a presence. Another kindred can potentially notice this distortion, like I said way back. So what was her plan exactly? Was the whole thing really predicated on the Nomad willingly joining her? Except she went out of her way and found the one person who's explicitly written to have hated and has been battling the Sabbat for centuries, arguably the antithesis of everything she believes in, and views the Sabbat as his arch enemy. The more you think about it, the more issues pop up. Coming back to Fabian, why is he sacrificing himself when there's no reason to? He can't control Phyre's body, he's little more than a voice in your head, and any power he had was consumed when Phyre devoured him long before this happens. He can't speed up the healing process. None of this makes any sense. Has anyone at the Chinese room even read the 5th edition rulebook? Have they ever played Vampire The Masquerade in their life? I mean, the guy still goes out on a high note, but I don't get why he needs to, or what is even happening here. The Field of Sunflowers is an illusion constructed by Gideon. Why is it still happening? Fabian has no power at this stage, he's just a passenger along for the ride, and could do little more than dream while Phyre sleeps. So how is this scene even happening? You could argue it's a lingering trace of his Malkavian powers, but that's not acceptable. You don't get to use that as a get-out-of-jail-free card when Fabian has done nothing but talk until now for the entire game. I won't harp on this any longer, but man, in attempting to build to this grand finale, any logic went out the window. Literally. When Phyre finally awakens back to the real world, seemingly a few hours or days at most, and it's centuries too soon like I said, they're not even roused by blood. Let's finally talk about the biggest problem with the ending. This is, by far, the worst Masquerade breach in history. To call it a breach is a colossal understatement. Even if we forget everything that's happened so far, a frenzied Nomad waking from torpor, the Sabbat and ghouls fighting on the rooftops, the vampire on fire crawling across the ground in front of civilians, which one of them even says vampire, I really don't think the Chinese room understands what the unbirthed and Sabbat forces coming up from the sewer would entail. This is not the kind of thing that spawning in some random NPC out of thin air to conveniently stake the sheriff through the heart could fix, or a cleanup crew that wipes the memories of a few mortals. This is set in modern day 2024, and just as with Phyre crawling across the ground when he's on fire, you're telling me people wouldn't pull out their phone the moment they saw any of this? That it wouldn't go viral in an instant and start a mass panic worldwide and a global war against kindred and kind? This is the worst case scenario. It is everything that the Camarilla, the Anarchs, every single vampire who even slightly adheres to the traditions has feared. The human world becoming aware of the vampire's existence, and the ramifications of this would destroy everything and everyone in the process. The Sabbats' plan is insane, but at least that's consistent with who they are as a faction, because they are far less kindred than there are kind. Maybe in the 1920s this would have been possible, but remember, this is the age of smartphones, social media, the 24-hour news cycle. Imagine this kind of thing happening in our actual real-life world. What happens in Seattle is not one or two rogue kindred or a house on fire that could be easily waved away or swept under the rug. This is a cataclysmic event that would spell the end of kindred society, if not the whole world along with it. Where have all the humans gone? You're telling me the very second this would go viral online, the Second Inquisition wouldn't immediately mobilize their entire forces worldwide and descend on Seattle in a bloody holy war? Sophia and the rest of the Sabbat can rant and rave as much as they like. What happened to the sun? Are we just expected to believe they can perform whatever rituals the plot demands now? It's like those stupid fucking Marvel Infinity Stones from Baldur's Gate 3 all over again. Anyway, I could keep going on and on. We'll get to this in what a joke the ending is in a bit, but Sophia has gone full crazy at this point, and the final boss is an annoying slog. Why doesn't Phyre have the option to bend down at any time and drink from the pool beneath him? I don't like the conceit of the boss fights in this game anyway, that you have these extra bars to chip away at, because it doesn't make sense mechanically. It also doesn't make sense narratively here that Sophia doesn't just strip Phyre of his powers like the others have done throughout the game, such as Isabella at Atrium, and immediately diabolise him, but whatever, it's finally over. Just before this boss fight, Phyre said he'd be taking her out first before heading for Lou's head next. At this point, I was ready to go full medieval on Lou Graham and show her what a 400-year-old elder vampire could really do, just as much as the Anarchs and Sabbat, but oh, that's it, I guess. Time to roll credits. What a fitting note to end this game on. Much like the relationship system, the very few major choices Bloodlines 2 pretends to have, you don't even get to see or feel the effects of either. A while back, I made a video talking about the end slides and what a cop-out they've become rather than showing in-world effects of the choices you make in RPGs and other games. Clearly, I should have waited. Just like Dying Light 2's bit of text on screen, nothing you did ultimately matters. You don't get to kill Lou, you don't even get to take out Kasumi, you don't get to deal with the Inquisition. A bit of voiceover from Tolly tries to sum it up in about 30 seconds, and that's it. Wow. I got the ending where Lou thankfully burned to a crisp after the Second Inquisition rolled in, going full scorched earth. Why this didn't happen earlier, and how the Masquerade could possibly be restored and all of this explained away is something we've already been over, but for as much as the game pretends otherwise, nothing you ultimately did matters. It's just a fancy pre-rendered video, little more than the slides in Fallout 1, and that's the best they could do, I guess. The Nomad escaped, so that's something. Oh well, I guess everyone else died. Would have been nice to see that, or play through it, but how dare I have any expectations, I guess. The Chinese room probably ran out of money and time, and they thought this disgrace of a story wasn't even worth any kind of proper resolution. What a fantastic note to end this gargantuan review of a spiteful disgrace of a game on. I don't know, man. I think I've been through all the stages of grief by this point. One of the big cope arguments that came up back when Fallout 4 first released was that it was a good game, but not a good Fallout game. Fans of Assassin's Creed and many other franchises roll out this excuse every time, but if it wasn't already clear given how goddamn long this video is going to be by this point, Bloodlines 2 is not a good game in its own right, and it's a truly awful Bloodlines game. Maybe the cop-out that had the Chinese room been allowed to call it something else, like Vampire the Masquerade Awakening or something, would have meant people could have been kinder on this game, but stopped defending developers as if they're victims when they were given so many years and tons of assets to reuse, and this is the best they could do. Clearly they were focused on other games the studio was working on in the meantime, like Still Wakes the Deep, in prioritizing gameplay over depth for all the wrong reasons and failing to make that compelling, there is nothing left over. Initially, I wrote a line in the intro section that I was considering whether this had surpassed Fallout 4 as the worst game I've ever played, but I don't think it's quite on that level. It certainly gives Baldur's Gate 3 a run for its money as the most disappointing, even expecting the absolute worst, that this was damned long before release, that I thought I made my peace with it years ago. It still managed to make me depressed about the state of Vampire the Masquerade and what little time the World of Darkness IP has left, and I mean that sincerely. This game is depressing. It doesn't make me angry anymore. I could even put up with the gaping leaps in logic or how it disregards the lore and the entire tabletop rules at every turn if they had just managed to tell a story or given me something to hold on to. I had already written this game off, and chances are Hardsuit Labs version would have been a shoddy mess like the first game anyway, but Bloodlines 2 fails in just about every way. It cannot, and frankly should not, be redeemed. Nor does it deserve to be. Shame on you if you pre-ordered the special edition. If you're one of the mindless sheep lapping up the content of the week, or you're an idiot just like the grifters you're overreacting to by trying to make this game out as a flawless masterpiece when it's the polar opposite. There is no speech, no prophetic words I have to end this on. I guess I just need to mourn Vampire the Masquerade and the world of darkness that could have been, because after all these years, this is all we get. Maybe it should have just stayed dead.